If you're an outdoor enthusiast and you know what these things are, you're gonna wanna watch this video because yesterday at Apple's WWDC event, they announced a new feature for your iPhone that may make these things kind of obsolete. So let's rewind time a bit when Apple announced that newer iPhones like this iPhone 15 Pro here would support SOS communication over satellite. And the use case here was that if you're off the beaten path, you're out hiking in the woods or something, and you have no cell reception, you'd still be able to call for help in the event of emergency. And this feature has since been publicly rolled out to all iPhones, so if you have a newer iPhone, you have this feature. You can literally dial 911 if you're off the grid in the middle of the ocean, wherever, and your phone will actually instruct you how to aim your phone at the sky to achieve a connection with a satellite, and you'll be able to send emergency messages and get help, which is kind of amazing and kind of a game changer. And if you remember about a year ago, I made a very similar video to this one talking about that very feature and how it would affect the sales of devices like the Garmin InReach or the Motorola Defy or whatever other satellite communicator you might have. Last year when they rolled out that SOS over satellite feature, the Garmin InReach still had a few advantages because the SOS feature on the iPhone was really only for emergency purposes. You could only use it if you're in a dire situation and needed help. However, just yesterday at this year's WWDC event, they announced a brand new feature in conjunction with that SOS satellite communication feature. You can now send recreational text messages over satellite. It does not need to be an emergency message. It doesn't need to be just for help. You can send a message to your friends and family to let them know you're running late or just to chat, I guess. Even though this new message over satellite feature is super exciting, there are still a lot of unknown questions that need to be answered because Apple covered this new feature in literally under 1 minute at the Apple keynote event. They focused the majority of the event over their new AI features and all the other stuff and kind of glazed over this one, which is kind of unfortunate for those of us who go outdoors pretty often. In terms of how this will all work on your iPhone when you're actually out in the field, I can only go from what they showed during the demonstration during the keynote, and it showed a very similar animation to what the SOS over satellite looked like. Basically, when you go to send a text message, the phone will identify that you do not have a cell phone signal. There's no cell phone towers nearby, and it will default back to satellite communication. And when that happens, there will be a little dialog box that pops up on your screen that will indicate that your message is being sent over satellite. From there, the phone will guide you on how to aim your phone at the sky to get the best connection at the closest satellite to you. And once you have a connection, you'll get a status update on how the message is being sent. And when it comes to the actual messages that are supported by messages over satellite, this will work with Apple Messages. So you will still see that blue bubble. You'll have end-to-end encryption. You can use emojis, and you can even react to messages with, the haha or whatever thing that you do with all your friends. On top of that, messages over satellite will also support standard SMS messaging. That means there'll be a green bubble with no encryption, but that is important if you're trying to send to a person that does not have an iPhone. Even though Apple Messages with blue bubbles are supported, it's important to keep in mind that you won't be able to send images through this or videos. Those are far too big and data hungry to send over satellite. Now that we've talked about how Apple Messages over satellite will work, let's quickly compare it to something like the Garmin InReach I have here. So currently, at the time of filming this video, the Garmin InReach Mini 2 I have here costs $299. If you go for something like the Garmin InReach Messenger, this device is about $249 right now on sale. And if you go for the Motorola Defy here, which is a bit different of a device, this costs about $150. Now, on top of all of these devices, you will need to buy a subscription to make them work, and those can range between $5 for the Motorola Defy, about $11 at a minimum for the InReach devices, and all the way up to over $100 for the InReach devices, and that will depend how many messages you want to send on a given month. Another thing to consider with the Garmin InReach devices, or the Motorola Defy for example, is that they're an additional device that you need to carry while you're out hiking, and for me, I'm typically wearing a trail running vest when I'm out in the woods, and those vests don't have a ton of storage, so any little device device I can eliminate from my pack is a welcome change and a lighter weight and makes me happy. Admittedly, I do like having a separate device in some ways. For example, I can rely on this that the battery's not going to die while I'm out in the wild. If I'm using my phone to take pictures and videos and stuff, that's gonna wear on the battery, where, you know, the InReach devices or the Motorola devices, they're standalone devices dedicated for SOS messaging or sending messages, so you can kind of bank on them not dying while you're out there. Another thing that the Garmin InReach devices do have going for them is that they do support live tracking when you're out doing a hike or a trail run, for example. You can send a link to your friends and family and they can follow you in real time, which is super cool if you're doing something way out there like an ultra marathon or you're out in the mountains. That's where these InReach devices or the Motorola Defy make a lot of sense. Another thing to consider is that your Garmin InReach device can also receive weather updates over satellite, and that can be important if you're doing like a thru hike or something like that. You have no satellite or you have no cell phone coverage. You want to get the weather update to know whether or not you should do a big day of hiking. Then again, if you do have messaging capabilities, you could always message your mom and ask what the weather update's going to be, and she could send it to you via message. So yeah, I guess that makes sense too. With that quick comparison out of the way, let's talk about what questions still need to be answered about the message over satellite feature. The first thing is there going to be any limitations with this feature? Is there going to be a cap on how many messages you can send on a given month, or how long those messages can be? Because I know that is a problem with other satellite devices, or did they overcome that with Apple? Another question I have is going to be how much battery will it take to send messages via satellite? I can only assume that a connection to a cell phone tower takes much less power than broadcasting a signal into outer space to get that message across. And we'll have to wait and see on that as well. If it means you're going to lose like 10% of battery every time you send one message, it may not be very practical, and we'll have to wait and see on that too. And the final question I have is going to be, will this feature be free forever? Because if you recall, last year when they announced SOS over satellite, they mentioned that for now it's going to be free, but they alluded to it costing something down the road, and that never really panned out. They never really explained what it's going to be, how much it's going to cost. Now I'm wondering with this feature, because it is more recreational and it's something people might use more often, if eventually they may need to charge for it, you know, like a service fee or something like that. And again, we don't know the answer to that. Time will tell. With all that being said, I am genuinely very excited about this new feature, and I can't wait to try it out for myself on my iPhone when it's available to everybody out there. And speaking of public availability, Apple said that this feature will be rolled out sometime later this summer, so keep an eye out for that. And I think the real question here is, if it works as advertised and it stays free forever, and you can just send and receive messages when you're off the grid, what's going to happen to Garmin InReach? I have to imagine there's going to be a dent in the sales of these devices with something so simple like this existing, because a lot of people already have iPhones in their pockets. So what's going to compel them to go out and spend an additional $300 and then, you know, $11 to $60 a month on top of that when you already have something that can do most of what this thing does? We're going to have to wait and see. This is going to be a real battle of the ages here, whether or not Garmin InReach can survive with the new Apple messaging app over satellite around, and I'm excited to see what happens here. Now I want to hear from you. Does this kill the Garmin InReach? Will you keep your InReach if you already have one? Will you buy an iPhone just because of this feature? Maybe you had an Android before and this came out. Let me know in the comments down below. I would love to hear from you. And while you're down there, please consider going down and giving me a thumbs up and subscribing to this channel. Check out the links in the description down below where I've got the iPhone linked and all of these satellite communicator devices. And while you're down there in the description, check out all the links to my other social media accounts, like my podcast, my Instagram, my Threads account, and of course my merch store where you can get a sweet hat like this. Check that out. It's a good looking hat, right? All right, friends, that's the end of this short but sweet video. I hope you enjoyed it. Drop down in the comments. Let's talk down there, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.